Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Foster from Northumbria University in England. Together with Dr. Robbie Duschinsky, I'm working on a Wellcome Trust funded project looking at the practice implications of attachment theory. This is one of a series of videos in which we ask leading attachment researchers in the field to discuss key attachment concepts and research findings and their relevance to practice with children and families. The focus of this video is reflective functioning. With me is Professor Howard Steele. Howard is co-director of the Centre for Attachment Research at the New School in New York. He's also founding and past president of the Society for Emotion and Attachment Studies, editor of the journal Attachment and Human Development, and a 2017 awardee of the Bowlby Ainsworth Award from the Centre for Mental Health for contributions to the field. Howard is also one of the creators of the reflective functioning scale, so it's great to have him here to talk about this with us today. So Howard, before we talk specifically about reflective functioning, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about why you think attachment is such an important theory.
Attachment theory is, I think, a really important theory, especially in London, where it was originated by John Bowlby, and in the Western world, because it's quite revolutionary. It kind of flies in the face of so many assumptions in Western history, Western thinking, about philosophy, and about everyday kind of parenting matters. So we have in the West a long tradition of valuing independence. Every people wants to be independent. Britain, as we know, has just voted to be independent of Europe in the last year. And we hope that our children will be independent, capable of standing strong on their own feet and so on. And there's this flawed idea around that we become independent by giving up our dependence. And it was John Bowlby who said that we're dependent on others as infants, as babies, until the grave, all across the lifespan. And it was his argument that we are most healthy and self-reliant when we know that there's someone else we can rely on. And when we know there's someone else we can rely on, and we have lots of experience of turning to others for help when we have trouble coping, then we become reliable. We become available to others who might need our help. And that's really the heart of the attachment model. There's these technical terms, safe haven and secure base. So what a child needs, not just the human child, but other mammals, and this has been studied widely in non-human animals. The human or non-human animal at birth needs to be able to turn to a safe haven when they're in distress, and to know that when they can crawl or walk or move away from that safe haven, that they have that person, the attachment figure, has their back, and they can explore with confidence and joy, knowing that when they run into trouble, they got somewhere to turn.
So what is reflective functioning?
Okay, well, reflective functioning refers to a capacity of the human mind. It's linked very closely to language. We don't think of an infant in the first year of life as having reflective functioning, but soon after language develops, and by 3, 4, 5 years of age, children begin to have an idea of what it feels like to have a mind, to have the capacity to think about the contents of your own mind, what I'm feeling, and what other people might be feeling. Also what I'm thinking and what other people might be thinking. Now, in the best of circumstances, the 4 or 5-year-old child will have thousands of experiences of having parents, typically mother or father, grandmothers, stepmother, foster mother. Families take a diversity of forms, but all families include, in some sense, the most unprotected minority in the world, children. And those children need caregivers, parents and others, to talk to them about what they're feeling, to help them narrate or tell a story about their experience, and to help them realize that in any day there may be, to borrow a kind of gardening metaphor, there may be rain that helps things grow. There may be a storm as well, and you need to protect yourself against that. You may be angry and sad at times. Hopefully you'll have enough joyful experiences in a given day that you sleep well and wake up with hope the next day. But for children to have that range of feelings and know those feelings, they need lots of conversation with parents and others about what's going on. Somebody said to me not so long ago, I wish I had heard this when my parents were younger. When my children were younger, I wish I'd heard this suggestion when my children were very young. This was a parent who said that at bedtime, when they read a story to their 4-year-old or 5-year-old or 6-year-old, they ask, what was the rose of today? What was the really joyful, special thing that happened today? What was the thorn? And what's the bud? Thinking about tomorrow, So that's one set of questions that parents, if you like, can ask children that will stimulate their reflective functioning. But reflective functioning was first of all observed in adult attachment interviews that we collected, myself and a team that I was part of, attachment interviews we collected from women expecting their first child and fathers expecting their first child. And we asked the mothers and fathers we asked them about their parents. We asked them about the family in which they grew up. And we followed a set series of questions known as the adult attachment interview, essentially asking what happened during childhood, the first 12 years of life with mother and father. And then toward the end of the interview, after probing typical childhood calamities, what do you do when you're upset? What did you do when you were physically hurt, when you were ill as a child? And did you ever feel rejected as a child? We then asked, as you think about all these childhood experiences you've grown up with, do you think they have an impact on who you are today? And that's a question that demands evaluation. We came in the fullness of time to describe the answers that people gave to that question in terms of a 11-point scale or dimension that we call a range of reflective functioning, from absent reflective functioning, where someone says, do I think childhood has an influence on who I am today? I don't think so. If someone says no, that I don't think that's the case, it would be a low scoring response in terms of reflective functioning. If someone was open and curious and certain that something like that must be going on, my childhood, that must have impacted who I am as an adult. And we of course probe and ask them how that might be the case, and we follow up with another question that very much demands reflective functioning, and that is, why do you think your parents behaved the way that they did? Why do you think your parents behaved the way that they did during your childhood? And that is a remarkable question. I think the value of it may stand sort of on its own. Perhaps I could ask a passerby in the street, excuse me, I just have a question for you. Why do you think your parents behaved the way they did during your childhood? They may be surprised and not want to engage, but we ask that question after a half hour of discussion about family. And some people are immediately open to thinking about that, curious. They'll say that in order to answer the question, I need to tell you about my grandparents on each side, because my mother, no doubt, her behavior as a mother was influenced by what she learned from her parents, and my father was influenced by what he learned from his parents. And then they go on from there, setting forth very personal accounts of why their parents behaved the way they did. There are other people, when they hear that question, why did your parents behave the way they did? And they say, you'd have to ask them. Or they may say, you'd have to ask them, you're the psychologist, right? That's a little more edgy. Both of those responses are low in reflective functioning. So reflective functioning is about being curious about the causes of behavior in loved ones particularly. Being curious about the causes of the hotel clerk who told me yesterday that I didn't have a reservation in the hotel. That's another matter, and probably quite independent of reflective functioning in the context of attachment relationships.
What are the elements of reflective functioning, and can you give us some examples of those?
To elaborate further on reflective functioning, we had these 100 interviews from the mothers-to-be, 100 interviews from the fathers-to-be, and when the children were 12 months of age, we observed the child with mother to measure the child's security of attachment with her, the extent to which he or she can rely on the mother as a safe haven, secure base. 6 months later, following a strategy that at the time was widely used in other research labs, we observed the child's attachment to father. We observed that the child's attachment to mother is independent from the child's attachment to father. It develops independently, and we found that it develops independently in large measure as a function of the story that each parent told about their attachment history. And the most powerful predictor of the child's attachment to mother was whether or not mother was high. If a child was to be securely attached to mother, mother needed to be moderate to high in terms of reflective functioning. Independently of that, if the child was going to be securely attached to father, father was moderate to high in reflective functioning. These are results that were published more than 25 years ago, and reflective functioning has emerged as quite a dominant force in developmental and clinical psychology, also psychiatry. Now I'm going to introduce another term linked to reflective functioning, and that is mentalization. So when you hear that word mentalization, it's very much a synonym of reflective functioning. Reflective functioning, if you like, is the capacity to understand one's own mind and the minds of others, and mentalizing is the kind of language-based activity that allows us to guess what's in the mind of others and what's in the mind of the self. So there's a whole tradition of mentalization-based treatments informed by reflective functioning that have proven themselves to be very helpful in treating psychological, emotional difficulties, including personality disorder, anxiety, depression. There's family therapy informed by mentalization and reflective functioning. I would add one other thing, which is that reflective functioning is in some ways very similar to older concepts or older ideas like psychological mindedness or the self-observing capacity of the ego. These are terms, psychological mindedness and self-observing capacities, that date from earlier decades, middle 20th century, and they have their relevance. Reflective functioning is very similar to each of those terms, but we have a 11-point scale, a 75-page manual describing low, inhibited, moderate, and high levels of reflective functioning. And I'll summarize the scale if that would be useful. There are 4 parts to the reflective functioning scale. One is we look for signs that a person can understand the nature of mental states. And by that I mean the fact that we can't, for example, we can't see transparently into the mind of other people. The clairvoyant maybe can, but reflective function is anchored in science, not in superstition or clairvoyance. So a key feature, one of the essential features of mental states, is the opaqueness of mental states. We can't see clearly into our own or other people's minds, but if we are going to make connections with other people, we have to guess. So when someone says, I wonder if you might be thinking of where we're going to go for tea later, that's showing an awareness of the opaqueness of mental states, as opposed to, I know where you want to go for tea later. I know why you're doing that. You're doing that to irritate me. Parents will sometimes say that to a child, and if you catch parents at this, or if parents catch themselves in those moments of claiming to know what devious or malevolent idea the child is having, most parents, I believe, will recognize that they're imposing something on the child that doesn't belong to the child, but probably belongs to their own past, and that they're repeating a voice that they heard as a child. We're all influenced by voices from the past, and they are particularly available to us when looking after young children who are crying or protesting or in some way asking us to pay attention. And if we can calm down and pay attention, we might find ourselves able to reflect on the probable reasons why the child is distressed. I remember I'm a parent of 3 adult children, and one of the most useful things to do when my oldest child, a girl, was having a tantrum, I found, was to listen, watch, ask if I can give her something, what do you need, and letting her cry for only a few seconds, and then saying, why are you crying? And more than once, she would kind of shake it off and say, I don't know, and we'd move on to the next thing. So the opaqueness of mind is a characteristic. Another characteristic of mental states is their amenability to disguise, pretense. And we know that children, 2, 3, 4 years of age, love to pretend, to try on roles, vis-a-vis maybe a job that they'll do in the future, or to process and come to terms with some difficulty in the day or weeks or months before. But children acquire the understanding that their behavior and thoughts can be disguised only later. Typically around 7 years of age, children acquire what are called display rules, and they know then at 7 years of age that the emotion they display on their face may not reflect how they really feel inside. So when grandma comes with a new toy on their 7th birthday and it's something they hate or have already, they know to say thank you very much. At age 3 or 4, they're more likely to cry or throw it down and embarrass parents who hopefully will know that, as hopefully grandma will know that that's too bad that the present upsets you, but it's okay. We'll find you something else next time I come over that you'll like better. So those are just 2 characteristics of the nature of mind. There's a whole area in the reflective functioning scale to do with mental states and behavior, a 3rd piece about developmental processes, and another which is all to do with sensitivity to the present context.
How does reflective functioning relate to attachment?
Reflective functioning relates to attachment insofar as it helps us to repair misunderstandings or repair difficulties. We get into difficulties with other people every day of our life. Sometimes it's quite painful when the difficulties that we have are with people we also love, spouses, children. And there's a whole literature about rupture and repair. So these ruptures are inevitable. The question is how quickly we can repair things. And reflective functioning is a very useful tool to achieve the reparation. And to perhaps say I'm sorry, but it's not so much the expression of sorrow that one wants when they've been wronged by another person. They want to know that the other person is willing to consider their point of view, to slow down, to listen, to pay attention, to stop and rewind, if you like, and say, can we do that again? I think I want to state my response a little differently. I didn't mean to say that we can think of examples of all those situations when inadvertently we've offended somebody. And reflective functioning allows us to notice that and repair things.
Why is reflective functioning important for social workers and other practitioners working with children and families to know about?
Social workers and clinicians have typically an understanding of emotion regulation, but they may not fully appreciate the value of reflective functioning in achieving emotion regulation. So when they're interviewing carers, I would strongly suggest that they do a kind of mini attachment interview to assess the reflective functioning of the carer. Because if they have even a rudimentary grasp of the level of reflective functioning among the people they're working with, they'll have a much better idea about that person's capacity to deal with frustration, to deal with distress, to manage in their job, in the workplace, or in the family context where they may be responsible for a child. So asking questions, even a kind of a 5-minute speech sample, tell me about the family in which you grew up. Who looked after you? And it doesn't matter what the person says in response to that question. The goal would be that within 3 or 4 minutes to ask one of those questions I mentioned earlier, which demand evaluation or reflection, and say, I'm just wondering, why do you think your mother behaved the way that she did during your childhood? And if a person can hold their balance and be oriented to the present moment while also commenting on the probable reasons for mother's behavior, she had a drug addiction, she was coping with a difficult relationship with my father who was hardly ever around, he drove a truck, he was trying to make a living for the family, she hardly saw him, it was very frustrating. But luckily she had a good friend living next door whom she got advice from, and you can imagine how somebody might have a thoughtful, reflective answer to the question. The risk, of course, is that the person in answering that question, why do you think your mother behaved the way they did, might be dismissive of it. How should I know? Or to be very angry. I think she didn't know what she was doing. She still doesn't know what she's doing. She's very demanding. I had to come here to this meeting today for work. She expects me to pick up the shopping and do the wash for her. So there are people who are prone to a kind of hyperactivity in response to the question, just as there are people who are prone to being uninterested and dismissive of the question. And those are the types of responses that clinicians and social workers should be wary of. I wouldn't say that on this account alone they should screen someone out from possible inclusion in a job situation or a caring situation, but it might help identify where the challenges are and where resources should be placed to help people make sense of their experience and so be more competent in the caregiving role.
Can you promote reflective functioning in others, and if so, how would you go about doing that?
I've thought a lot about this question, and one possible useful answer is to think about mindfulness meditation. There's a lot of interest in this. It's in part imported from wisdom traditions in the Far East, but it's there in Judeo-Christian and Muslim wisdom traditions as well, tied in with meaningful prayer, if you like. But here, the prayer is all about the present moment and paying attention on purpose, which means calming yourself, being aware of your breath, counting to 10 perhaps when a child is having a tantrum, and then engaging with the process of making sense of experience. And when you give yourself that moment of pause, you have a much greater chance to approach the problems in your world in a way that will lead to something that feels like a solution for yourself and others.